People want to be independent. And if you can give somebody an option to be energy independent, and eventually batteries get to the level where they can actually store all the energy that you need for your home at night in a cost-effective way, then people will continue to adopt it. And this year is going to be like the turning point for that, where now people with electric cars are going to be able to plug them into their house, and if they have a solar system, that solar system will be able to distribute that energy however you want it.
This is the Human Future Podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and spirituality with some of the world's brightest minds. Together, we paint a vision of the desirable future and discuss the actionable steps to make that vision a reality. And now, without further ado, let's begin. Welcome. Thank you, Aleksandr, for being here. What a pleasure to have you in the space. Excited for our conversation. When I was doing a little research on your background, lots of questions were emerging for me that hopefully we'll touch on today. But before we do that, maybe you'll give a little introduction of who you are, what's your story, what are you up to?
My name's Aleksandr Bernhard. I was born in New Orleans, and I've always been interested in sustainability and renewable energy and electric vehicles. Those are really, solar energy, electric vehicles. That was kind of a seed that was planted when I was a kid. I was about, I would say maybe 12 years old, getting ready to go to high school. And they had this program called Summer Bridge, which assigned kids that, I don't know exactly what I know all the kids from the school didn't go there, but I had a feeling it was just kind of like for people that maybe I was coming from a public school situation going into a private school, and they thought that they needed kind of some help to sort of transition into the high school. And so I had this, I guess you would call it a mentor back then, really cool guy. And he actually ended up going to like MIT, getting a doctorate. But back then when you're a kid, you meet somebody who's like a teenager and they seem like an adult. Like you really look up to them. And so he was probably only like 16 or 17 at the time. Mm-hmm. And, so I was, he must have been a little bit older, but not too much older. And so I was getting ready to go into high school. So our project was to build this solar powered vehicle. And so it was basically like put a solar panel on top of this like foam structure and had like a propeller. And it stuck with me for years. And I just was like dreaming of one day putting solar panels on my house. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved to Miami, eventually I was, fortunate enough, with my wife to purchase a home. Yep. And that was one of the first things I wanted to do. And then I found that, in Florida, it's a little bit tricky because you have, the roofs here with the hurricane winds. You really can't just put solar panels anywhere on an older roof because at some point you're going to have to take the roof off. You're going to have to take the solar panels off. It's just going to be a mess and super expensive. So all the installers were like, no, you got to wait until you get a new roof. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, we had Hurricane Irma. That was back in 2017. And the damage from that hurricane, we actually had to put a new roof. And so then I was like, all right, got this new roof. Right. Just, spent a fortune on it. And I was like, man, do I really want to put a bunch of holes in my roof that we just replaced because of the fact that it was leaking and it was damaged? And so I started looking for like a carport / outdoor pergola type, product. Yep. And I, started calling solar installers and trying to see if something out there was like that. And there were most of them you couldn't really install in Florida because of the, the wind requirements. But I've always been somebody who's very into design and, the kind of the way something makes you feel when you look at it and you're around it. And everything out there was just really very industrial. Like, yeah, sure, it would work in a parking lot where there's no kind of like warmth needed, but if this is something that's going to go in your house, right, it has to look good, it has to feel good. You have to want to be around it, and it's like a permanent fixture. I mean, this thing is going to be in front of your house forever or in your backyard forever. And so I started developing something that kind of was really more for myself. But then as I spoke to more, solar installers, I started realizing this is like actually a legitimate market. And so really put a lot of work into the design, the aesthetic design, and then started doing the engineering. But one of the things that I learned from my previous startup is that it's one thing to have a conceptual design that looks good in a rendering, and it's another thing to actually make it look like that. And so, back in the day, not as much nowadays as before, but you would see these like crazy concept cars come out that look like they were from like, 20, 30 years in the future. And then like the actual version comes out, you're like, this has nothing to do with the original thing. And so what I had done in my previous startup in that wearable technology brand, I had actually created something that looked exactly like the rendering. It was almost indistinguishable. And so I knew you could do it, and you just had to go through a bunch of, manufacturers and partners that tell you no until you find one that tells you yes. And so we did that. I say we because eventually I brought on a co-founder, Stefano, onto the company, and started finding these manufacturers here. Again, I wanted to do it here in the US. Didn't want to just do it overseas for many reasons. I mean, for me, I think it's important to, contribute positively to the, the economic prosperity of the country that I live in. And also just for practical reasons, having been in manufacturing before, I've seen the difference between something that's imported from outside of the US to something that's actually made here.
Right.
And usually there's a difference in not just the quality, but really just the logistics of the whole thing, and being able to work with manufacturers and, doing something like a startup. You're not going to order, 100,000 of these things in the beginning. And when you do that overseas, you have these crazy minimum order quantities. And so I said, no, we're going to do this the right way. It's going to look great, and it's going to be extremely durable, able to withstand these hurricane force winds. So eventually what we created it's called the NPod. It's the company's Pavilion Solar, based out of here in Miami. And we actually won 2 grants from the Department of Energy, this American-made solar prize. And so we were very fortunate to be able to use those funds to actually build the permanent tooling. So now we're in production. So now we're actually able to sell the product. So it's super exciting. We have a lot of interest from people all over the country. I mean, we were focusing on Florida initially, but we have people in Hawaii who are very interested in this. They have hurricane issues over there, in Texas, even in California. And so it's a pretty exciting time for us. We're really, excited to be where we are, and very, very grateful and fortunate.
Awesome, man. Yeah, this is great. Thank you for sharing all of this. I wanted to maybe dive deeper into understanding the whole solar energy generation and even starting from, can you explain how the solar panel or solar battery, even solar panel work? What happens? How is that? They convert solar, like sun energy, into electricity. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's basically there's a silicon-based panel that when a photon hits it creates electricity. So that's like basically the simplest way to look at it. So when light from the sun hits this solar wafer, it actually creates an electric charge. And so as you build out this wafer that's made out of silicon and a substrate underneath it, usually copper, then you can actually create electricity. And the bigger the panel is, the more electricity. Now, there's all kinds of new technologies that have come throughout the years that increase the efficiency. So kind of nowadays, the solar panels are on the upper end. They're around 22% efficient, which is still not that high.
Okay.
But there's kind of this, Moore's law, where you hit the sort of the maximum level of efficiency that you will ever get on solar panels. So there's some more technology that people are working on to kind of increase that efficiency. But it'll hit a point where it's kind of like going to get as efficient as it's going to get.
Okay.
Which is probably still below 30%, unless some kind of crazy other technology comes out. But it's basically when the sun hits the panel. And by the way, interestingly, when it's cloudy, I was shocked at how much electricity the panels still actually produce, because you still have, certain wavelengths of light that are getting through the cloud.
Right.
And you still produce electricity.
How much less do you produce in percentage?
It's quite a bit less. Yeah, I would say, on a regular day, my system with a full sun, best case scenario is probably producing like maybe 40 kilowatt hours. And then on, totally cloudy day, maybe it'll produce something like, 12 to 15 kilowatt hours. Yeah. But it's not nothing. It's just, it's still something. So that was kind of surprising to me that, always people said that, but I'm like, it's just like a sales thing, but it actually does work when it's cloudy.
And then what about, so you said 22%, percent efficiency. What is the 100% measured in? Like, how do you define what 100% is?
So it's a good question. I don't know the exact answer. I believe what it has to do is with the amount of energy that's measured from the light that's hitting it. So whatever energy the photon has, however you measure the energy of a photon, it's taking 22% of that energy and creating electricity from it, and the rest is being released as heat. So that's kind of like the difference. So that other 78%, whatever it is that's going to be just released as like infrared heat.
I see.
So solar panels actually get quite hot, and when they get hotter, they actually get less efficient.
Right. So theoretically, if the battery is 100% efficient, it doesn't heat up. It consumes all of the energy that the sun is producing. Like it's just capturing it all and converting it into an energy. It's like a cold unit that doesn't generate any heat.
Yeah, I mean, that's what. So remember, there's two different technologies. So we have battery technology and we have solar technology. So basically, the battery technology is just taking that electricity that you generated, and instead of putting it back into the grid or into your home, when you produce more electricity that you're using, you can actually store it into a battery. A battery is a lot more efficient. Batteries are, in the probably like over 90% efficient range in terms of how much energy you're putting into it and how much energy you can get out of it. So those are a lot more efficient than the solar panels themselves.
And what is the limit that we're hitting with the efficiency? Why is that almost like a hard limit?
Well, you look at it sort of like the same type of limits that you have with like LED and computer chips. There's thermodynamics is it's always at play. So you hit a limit of being able to manage the amount of heat that's generated in there. And I think at the atomic level, what ends up happening is that you can never get to that 100% efficiency. And in the case of solar panels, because of the characteristics of those materials that are used, the silicon based, and that's why some of the new technologies, they actually add kind of like different methods of tweaking that the limit a little bit higher. But no matter what, when the laws of physics are they're gonna create limitations as to how much efficiency you get. And when it has to do with physics and thermodynamics, you really there's no way around it. Unless you find a way to maybe cool this off at like absolute zero, then maybe you can get something that's much higher, which is never going to happen. And you also have to start balancing the costs of increase that efficiency with how much you're actually generating. So solar panels are just so cheap now. I mean, the prices have dropped like 90% in the last 10 years, and probably 50% in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's really huge drops in pricing, where you hit a point where they're efficient enough and cheap enough that to just put more money into increasing that efficiency and the amount of cost that it adds to the panel, you're better off just adding another panel to the system. So
it's much easier to double the or like reduce the price in half than increase the efficiency by 100%.
Yeah, it's the pricing is linear and the efficiency is kind of logarithmic. So it's going to get to that point where it's about as good as it's going to get with this specific technology. And solar has a huge role to play in alternative energy, but there's other ones out there. There's other ones out there, and it comes up to like in terms of how much energy you're producing. We have like small scale nuclear that's coming out. Of course, cold fusion, which is like the dream, which every day you see kind of a little bit of incremental progress in that direction, which as soon as that becomes feasible, which could be in 100 years, could be less. Some people, it's always 30 years away, but it's been 30 years away for a while now. So with the advent of AI, they've made some kind of discoveries with, controlling the plasma. But once, cold fusion comes, everything else is, solar, geothermal, all this stuff. It becomes totally irrelevant. But this is a long time in the future.
Yeah. So the question about the efficiency, I also compare it to the throughput of information that travels through like fiber optics or something like that. So they're learning how to split the wave into different colors, and then they use each color as a way of transmitting information through like modulation and things like that. It's interesting that there is a number like what is the that's why I was asking about the 100%. How did they measure it? They have the same different method of measuring it, but same idea where there is a 100% like how much theoretically how much information can travel through let's say fiber optics, and they're actually like pretty close. It's definitely not 22. It's more like 90%. Like they're really close to utilizing a full spectrum of light, and they were able to harness all of the wavelengths and be extremely efficient with like harnessing this medium basically.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Maybe the economics just don't make sense in solar panels to further extend the efficiency and like find new ways. Maybe it's already good enough and there's no enough demand to push that limit further and further or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be some incremental, the theoretical limit. I'm not sure what it is, but and maybe there's a number out there, but in terms of, there will be some incremental improvements over the years. There's this material, it's called perovskite, which is if you add it to the actual wafer itself, you can increase the efficiency. The problem is they haven't figured out a way to really. There's two things: the strength of it is it's quite it's not that strong, but also to mass produce it. It's kind of like this solid state battery type thing where it's superior to non-solid state, but they haven't really gotten the economies of scale on it yet. So yeah, maybe you'll get to like closer to 30% in the next 5 or so years, but you don't really need to. The technology is kind of where it needs to be. Okay. And it would be great to increase the efficiency, because then with less panels, a lot of times people are limited by their rooftop space, by the way. And so this is one of the big use cases for any solar canopy, not just the end pods, but any solar canopy, is that, people with the advent of electric cars and, electric appliances, there's electrification of appliances happening now, heat pumps, all this stuff, they're kind of going away from the use of fossil fuels, including natural gas. All of a sudden you have this increased energy consumption. And if you have solar, there's only so many panels you can put on your roof. And the next step is to put something that's mounted on the ground. And so that's why solar canopies, they're becoming a much bigger alternative to rooftop solar. And by the way, there's this study that when I was kind of working on the business initially, I was looking at this study. It was from the Department of Energy, that half of homes in the U.S. that aren't even eligible for rooftop solar because, different reasons. The roof could be too old, it's in the wrong direction, it's too small. You can only put a few panels, it's not going to fully offset enough. So there's a huge part of the population that even if they want to go solar, they can't because of their roof. So it's a big part of the market.
Yeah, I was going to ask, looking at roofs and homes in Florida, in the sunny Florida, there's so much sun, you would think there are not that many solar panels out there. No, they're not. So it's starting to change. So Florida is now, I think they're like between number 2 and 3 in terms of the amount of solar that's been installed so far this year. They were actually number 1 for like the first half of the year at the utility scale. So that basically means like FPL building these huge solar fields. I see.
But at the residential scale, also Florida is growing, one of the top markets for growth, because the difference is, like, if you look at, California up to very recently, they had huge incentives for solar. I mean, massive incentives. They even, made it a law that new construction had to have some percentage coming from solar. But the big change that happened recently is that, so like right now in Florida, if I produce more electricity that I'm using, I send it back to FPL, they give me credit for the exact same cost per watt that I'm paying them. So it's the retail, 1 for 1. But what happened in California is now that, and what that does is that it lowers the payback period on solar panels. No matter what, whether you're getting, net meter, it's called net metering, whether you have that or not, your solar panels are going to pay for themselves, but it's going to take longer for them to pay for themselves if that extra electricity that you're producing isn't being credited back to you, or you're not putting it into a battery.
Right.
So, because obviously at night you don't have solar. So if you don't have a battery, you're getting your electricity from the grid no matter what. So what's happened in California is that over time they hit a certain threshold, which I think is around 10% solar, in terms of like how much market penetration there was. And, there's a lot of things that come in play, in terms of like politics and like, the big players and utilities. Everybody has a reason, for how they want the solar market to go. But at the end of the day, it's, it goes against the business model of utilities. So basically what ended up happening, they have pretty big influence, not just in California, but everywhere. But in California, they basically eliminated net metering on a 1-to-1 basis, and they're kind of scaling it down. So eventually it's going to go away. I believe in 2026, even if you produce more solar, than you use, you're not going to get paid for it. So it's
unless
a big
you
deal.
have your own battery and to
Exactly.
utilize
So,
that. Yeah.
so now that's like they call it the new version of the net metering is that there is actually incentive to have batteries, because what can happen now, which actually helps the utilities, is that instead of having to build a new power plant at peak sun, if you have all these people with these batteries and they're producing more energy than they're using, you can actually tap into this resource and you have a virtual power plant. And so this is a really big deal, because for utilities, it prevents them from having to have these, what they call peaker plants, which are horribly polluting plants that run basically on diesel fuel, to when you have these peaks of electricity use, these plants turn on. But the beauty of solar is that those plants turn on a lot of times in the middle of the day, because it's so hot and air conditioning is running. So you have solar, and that can be offset with these batteries. And so, and it's the same thing at night too, by the way. When people get home, they start charging their vehicles, there's this kind of spike in electricity, and the utilities, they're able to leverage this resource of the battery that people have in California. And so that's starting to roll out in other places as well. California is really at the forefront of that. But that's kind of where the market is going right now. So the solar plus storage is a big deal. Now, here in Florida, the benefit of it, it's still not quite there with the batteries. I mean, your power goes out a few times a year. And yes, if you want to have power during an outage, you have to have either a battery or a certain type of microinverter that allows your panels to create a microgrid. But even in the case of the microgrid, you're going to be powering a fan, maybe a couple of outlets. You're not going to be powering your AC with that. There's no way you can have enough solar panels to actually power your AC just like directly from the panel. It has to go to a battery first.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so here in Florida, it's going to, but I mean, the cost of batteries is still very high. They've come down precipitously.
Okay. But
there, I mean, you think about one battery, you're looking at like $10,000-$12,000 for a single battery. That maybe you're going to use it, when a hurricane comes, God forbid you'll have to use it. But if the hurricane's that bad that it's here, you're probably not going to stay in your house. Or you're going to use it at night, but then you're cycling the battery every night. And these batteries have a limited amount of cycles that they can do before they're, lose their efficiency. So that's kind of one part about like the storage element that still needs a lot of work.
So if you're saying AC is taking a lot more energy than any kind of solar panel big enough to cover the whole roof can produce, where would the access like additional energy come from if, let's say, in sunny Florida, AC is running pretty much the whole day and the sun is being collected the whole day? Where does the excess energy come from?
Well, so basically what happens is that when you're producing the solar energy, you're not feeding it directly into your home. It's actually getting fed back into the grid.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that some of that energy is being distributed to your home and some of it's going back to the grid. It's interesting. You can actually look at the app on your phone and it'll show you like an arrow of which energy is going to your house and which energy is going to the grid. Yeah. So the energy is going to your house. It can be high enough to power the air conditioner, but when you think about it, that energy is never going to be totally constant. So you have clouds coming through. There's a lot of things where that needs to be sort of equalized, that level of energy. And the real thing is not the ongoing energy needs of the air conditioner is usually something that a certain amount of solar panels can handle, and some houses have enough. When the air conditioner first turns on, there's this huge draw of electricity in that moment that really only a battery can handle. And so you kind of have to have a battery to be able to run that AC system off grid. But once it's actually running, then yes, the solar panels can produce the electricity to fully offset that that energy use. And as you get more efficient with air conditioners, you have heat pumps now that are 30% more efficient than traditional air conditioners. You get even closer to being able to offset that.
And what do we need to speed up the adoption of solar panels? Why most of the roofs are empty? Why?
Well, it's still expensive. There's like kind of a part of it of just like awareness. I mean, people know about solar, but I think there's like this big idea that solar is really expensive because yes, the upfront cost can be, expensive. But when you find, I mean, for instance, my system, I financed my system. Most solar systems, you can finance them for like 25, 30 years.
Right.
And I pay something like $150 for my system. It has a pretty low interest rate. fortunate enough to get an interest rate, several years ago when the interest rates were lower. But even now they're starting to come down. We got our 0.5%, cut yesterday. So that's going to, these kind of things are going to have a pretty profound effect. So interest rates were actually hurting a lot, the residential, solar energy. But I think it's a matter of some people just don't want to put panels on their roof. And this is another, big motivator behind these kind of ground mounted systems. Some people don't like how it looks. Here in Florida, we actually, we're fortunate to have a law here. It's the Florida Solar Rights Act. That means that you can't be prevented by your municipality from putting solar panels on your roof. It's actually illegal for them to tell you can't do it. They can kind of tell you, okay, well, put it on a different part of the roof. But if wherever they're telling you to put it lowers the efficiency of the system, they can't do it.
Yeah.
And so in Florida, it's actually a pretty solar-friendly state. And that's why you're seeing solar, growing here. But at the end of the day, it's still an expense. It's still expensive to actually, take on a loan like that. Some people are, what we want to just kind of help people understand is that, yes, you're taking on a loan for whatever it is, $30,000, $40,000, $50 with batteries.
Yeah.
But if you're distributing this over a certain amount of time and your interest rate isn't that high, you're offsetting the actual cost that is a sunken cost to the utility to have something in your home that's actually paying for itself. And in many cases, right now, solar is cheap enough that if you finance a solar system, pretty much from day one, even the net cost of your financing for the solar system plus the minimum cost from FPL on solar, which is like $30, even if you put that cost together, you're still paying less per month than you would be if you were just paying the utility. That's right now. Those are the facts on the ground right now. So I think people just kind of need to, understand that this is the case, and not everybody does. I mean, I think there's a lot of assumptions. People just don't know that solar is as cheap as it is now. And, solar, as an industry, we need to do a better job of kind of informing people that this is the case. So, adoption definitely will continue to rise over time, and it's a matter of independence. I mean, this is not a political thing at all. People want to be independent. And if you can give somebody an option to be energy independent, and eventually batteries get to the level where they can actually store all the energy that you need for your home at night in a cost-effective way, then people will continue to adopt it. And, by the way, I rolled over here in my electric car on a rolling battery that, in the next couple of years, even now, there's already some vehicles that you can plug into your solar system, and that's your battery. So you have a battery in your vehicle already. That's a massive battery. These batteries in an electric vehicle nowadays are quite large. So you have this vehicle to home battery system that this year is going to be kind of like the turning point for that, where now people with electric cars are going to be able to plug them into their house. And if they have a solar system, that solar system will be able to distribute that energy however you want it. So you can have it distributed at night, or if you don't want to deplete your vehicle at night, you just want to use it for emergencies, you have this huge battery just sitting in your driveway or in your garage.
That's right. Yeah, that's cool. And what would you say so it sounds like we're moving towards a more distributed, decentralized way of building homes, since now you don't have to be plugged into the grid to have a fully functional, sustainable home out there. What would you say that would enable? Let's say now we have all of the tools, all of the tech to build a home anywhere you want. What kind of future would it enable?
Well, so there's a couple of layers to that question. So on the one hand, utilities right now do provide something which you're not really yet getting from from solar, is that kind of like constant source of electricity. So some people don't necessarily want to disconnect from the grid. If you can be connected to the grid, but also still have your own solar system and totally offset, so you're not really using the grid unless you need to, and eventually down the line, maybe they're using your battery and they're paying you to use your battery down the line, this is what's going to happen. Utilities, by the way, in Florida, you're not really technically allowed to be off grid. Some people do it, but legally speaking, you have to be plugged into the grid in Florida. So you cannot go off grid in Florida. People do it. And do you know why? The utility, they have a big pull. They have a big pull here. They'll basically frame it as something where, it's for emergencies that you need to have electricity for, heating and cooling, and well, not heating here. You don't need the heating part, but the cooling part, and fridges and things. And they'll frame it as like people, having access to electricity in emergencies and things like that. At the end of the day, it's an economic standpoint for them. I mean, the utilities don't survive. The utilities aren't needed anymore, they don't survive. So utilities are kind of adapting in different ways. Here in Florida, in most cases, we have monopoly utilities. There are a few municipalities. I think Orlando has their own. Tampa has their own. There's a couple of like smaller utilities out there, but most of it is NextEra Energy, FPL, and Duke Energy, like the big players. And so, yeah, I mean, in Florida, you can't technically be fully not connected. Like if I wanted to just disconnect my house from the grid, and be fully on batteries with solar, I technically legally can't do that.
Interesting.
So yeah,
but your bill could still be zero while plugged into the grid. No,
not in Florida. No, because basically what happens is that one of the ways that utilities are kind of offsetting the advantages of solar is that there's a minimum base fee. So they're charging you a fee to be connected to the grid, which it's fair enough. It's basically $25 after tax, like $30.
Okay.
So even in the months where I'm producing more energy than I'm using, I'm still paying that $30 minimum. And what happens? That extra credit gets pushed off into the future month where I'm using less and I need to draw from or producing less. I need to draw from the grid. So that's something that's, with Florida Power and Light. In other states, that might not be the case. And probably, I would imagine in Texas, it's, you can probably be off grid there if you want to be. But again, the deal with batteries, you need to have sun for the solar panels to work as efficiently as possible. There's only so long you can go with just clouds. And if you don't have enough battery storage, at some point you need electricity.
Yeah.
People just need, think about this is a really interesting fact that if you look at the change in the population density, if you look at it, how it changed when air conditioning actually became something that people had access to, it was absolutely profound. And so air conditioning, especially now with a climate that's just getting hotter, there's no way around that. You actually need to have AC to basically survive. I mean, I was in California for this conference last week. It was 107 degrees. You couldn't even go outside. I mean, and this summer we've had here was pretty brutal too. And people are doing work outside. I mean, you need to have air conditioning. And so because of that, you going off grid, you really need to have the right resources to do that. And if you really truly want to be, and by the way, some places you can have wind energy too. So you can, if you have enough property, in some place like rural Texas, or in the Southwest, you can set up a little wind farm and have yourself off grid using a combination of wind and solar too.
See, so back to the illegal not being plugged into the grid. So if you buy a piece of land somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Florida where there's no grid, you're technically not supposed to build a house there?
Yeah, probably. That's probably how it is, yeah. I would imagine that if there's no utilities already existing there, technically you're probably not supposed to have a habitable structure. You can probably have something that's like a technical, cabin type thing where you're not like a permanent, permanently living there. But in terms of like a permanent residential structure, I would imagine that if you're somewhere in Florida where there's no utility, you can't do it. At the end of the day, are they really going to go out and be like, oh, you're not connected to the grid, we're going to, no, probably not. But in the grand scheme of things, in municipal areas, population centers, you have to be connected to the grid, whether you like it or not. Which nowadays, at this point, you probably want to be connected to the grid. You don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden power goes out, it's cloudy outside, your battery's depleted, and it's the summer, and you have 100-degree weather outside, and all of a sudden you have no way to to get electricity.
I think that's certainly true until we have good enough technology, let's say, to power your home for a week or for a month. Then you're not worried too much about those little spikes. Just because you're right on the edge of like, oh, is it enough? Not enough?
Well, we have the technology now. I mean, you can certainly put as many batteries as you want in your house. If you have the means to do that, then by all means, you can absolutely do that. but in terms of something that can be done on a larger scale, and you know, batteries also they're quite large, and even the solid state batteries. So I think at some point in time you'll have these sort of localized microgrids where you know, utility might be something that powers 100 houses, and there might be a central battery. This is actually happening in some places around the country and around the world too, where and in Africa as well, by the way, where you have this kind of smaller scale grid that's powered by alternative energy, whether it be wind or solar, and then you have a battery. And there's different ways of, you know, storing energy too. There's you know, with water, there's you know, inertial energy storage, a lot of different technologies.
Yeah, I see it as us preparing to be a multiplanetary species, like
Absolutely
developing all of this tech to be able to like build off the grid little, you know, settlements in other parts. And yeah, decentralization is happening everywhere, not just in solar, but in, you know, finance and other like this. The whole blockchain technology is also kind of spilling out to every aspect of our life and enabling more centralized systems to be more decentralized.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at you know, that kind of the approach of like being an interplanetary species, and going back to batteries, currently batteries use a lot of heavy metals inside. You know, lithium is, and you know, very heavy. But even alternatives to lithium, metals are just heavy, and you're not going to transport metals through space to build a colony. You're going to have to figure out a way to make batteries wherever you go. And so looking at the composition of the soil in Mars for these reasons is really important, because you need to know not just water. Of course you need water. Everybody knows you need water. But you also need other elements to eventually build batteries, to build propellant for the rockets that are going to go there. So there's a lot of things that, you know, these kind of missions that are going to Mars, and they're taking these soil samples and figuring out what's in the soil. You'll need to base your, you know, your colonization off. You need energy. At the end of the day, you need energy. Mars, solar is going to be a difficult one, because you have tons of dust there. You have a lot of clouds. It's never really fully sunny there. So you can see what happens with you know, these devices that go there. They end up getting a layer of dust on the solar panels, and at some point they just stop producing, because unless you have something to clean those solar panels, they're just going to get covered by dust. And so over there, it's going to be interesting to see how, you know, I would imagine, you know, they maybe wind is going to be an option there, but it'll be interesting to see how they approach energy generation over there. And, you know, of course, fusion is probably going to come after we go to Mars. I mean, I heard, I think Elon Musk was saying yesterday they want to go in 4 years they want to go in 2 years in an unmanned mission, and then 4 years in a manned mission. Seems kind of aggressive to me, but, you know, he's made some claims like that before and actually done it. So let's see what happens. Yeah,
usually his timelines are not exactly accurate. Usually he underestimates. But he does deliver eventually.
Yeah, eventually he does it. I mean, look, you look at this. You know, the big rocket. The name is escaping me at the moment. The big stainless steel. What's the name of this thing again? The big one that's in Texas, in Boca Chica. And I mean, this thing is like comically large. And the damn thing takes off, and it's flying, and it's like going into orbit, and it's like, man, and they did it in such a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. It's incredible. And that's gonna, you know, that thing is massive, and the, you know, the payloads are gonna be pretty significant that you can put inside one of those.
Yeah, I think the more technologically sophisticated our physical things are, the more they follow the Moore's law, where it's hypothetical, like it's just, what's the word, it's not linear, but what's the other?
Exponential.
Right? So our mind just can't, it's hard to wrap our mind around how fast even the physical things that we build can like expand and evolve, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that it also connects back to you know, it's crazy. You know, you look at AI, and AI is really, it's going to touch every single aspect of everything. And so you even look at manufacturing, what you can do with AI is you can in a completely virtual environment, you can test things on a totally different level than you ever could before. And like instead, like before, you had to go through so many iterations of prototypes. I mean, even me with the NPod, we were able to go directly to production without a single prototype because we did everything virtually. We did virtual testing. We partnered with Sandia National Laboratories. They have this supercomputer in there that actually can do these tests on wind forces. So we did like this wind loading, all of it in a virtual environment. And that's now. So think about in a couple of years from now, you're going to be able to optimize manufacturing. You know, you're going to be able to do this level of development all virtually with a fraction of the expenditures. And so now you're going to have people coming, you know, competitors, by the way, to SpaceX and companies like this that aren't going to have those kind of resources, but somebody that's just in college or coming out of school is going to be able to develop something in a virtual environment. And it's just going to, you know, this whole technological development is just of the human species just going to, you know, it's going to grow exponentially, like you said.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, at some point, maybe we won't even need humans to try to figure it out. Because once AI is able to do science and it's able to have its own like goals and that we preset for it, let's say, optimize for, I know that maybe it's not a good idea to find one optimization function. It's not going to be as easy to do. But once we have a certain problem, we just throw like really intelligent AI at it and it figures out, it simulates the whole thing and says, this is where you need to build. And maybe even, if you approve me, I'm going to build it for you too, you know?
Well, yeah. So I think that it's an interesting thing to talk about because when you look at, like, for instance, design, like aesthetic design and mechanical design. So like if you would tell AI, you know, at least at this point who knows in the future, but I want to make let's use a solar canopy example. I want to make a solar canopy example. Make me something that's the strongest, least expensive as possible, and it'll just build you a square structure with, you know, basically no aesthetic kind of element to it. And then you say, oh, okay, make it look like whatever, like this kind of style, this kind of like Italian style, right? And then all of a sudden you start to get to the design aspects of it, and then you're going to be able to say, okay, well now build all the components. What's the best method to manufacture all these components? All things that I had to do myself, but in the future that I wouldn't have to do that. I'm basically going to say, I could draw probably in 2D on a napkin a picture of a solar canopy and give it to, you know, the AI and just say, look, this is how I want it to look. This is the, you know, I might not even have to tell it the material. What's the ideal material? What's the ideal manufacturing method? And it's going to be able to give you all that, including the full set of design with fasteners and everything out there. So kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it for people like me that are designers, but it's also saves you a lot of time so you can focus more on kind of bigger picture stuff. So really that's the way I look at it. Yeah, it's going to take out some of that kind of, you know, the hours that you spend doing things that, you know, are necessary in terms of like analyzing the strength and engineering of it. But it'll also give you more time to just create and be creative.
Right. Would you say a really good design often has some elements of natural patterns? That's why we like all of the curves and things,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I see, like you mentioned, your job maybe is not going to be as, like, you're not going to have as much to do if AI can take care of all of those calculations for you. But maybe your job is basically continuing building the bridge between nature and, you know, technology and finding new ways how to create. In fact, you know, I always say the most advanced technology is the one that's least noticeable. And I think as we evolve technologically, we're mimicking nature more and more. And at some point, maybe our most advanced solar panels will look like leaves on the tree, or maybe we'll be able to even utilize the leaves on the tree as like a source of energy.
Well, I mean, there's already a couple of apparatuses out there that do just that. It's called biomimicry, and you probably know about it. And so basically with biomimicry, you're doing what you're saying. So you're kind of mimicking elements of nature. Sometimes those are like functional elements that look aesthetic, but they actually have a functional aspect to it. And applying that to something like a piece of architecture. And so definitely that element of taking these characteristics of whether it's a plant or an animal, whatever it is, and applying that to the design of something which is kind of unrelated, kind of something humans have been doing for forever.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, they've been doing it forever. But then there was a point in time, I think, where because of like limitations in, manufacturing, there was a limit where, you look at like cars in the 80s, they're very square, and like, they were just like, manufacturers want to like pump out as many cars as possible. And there wasn't that much like design thought going into most of them. Of course, there were some. But now you're looking at, vehicles that are coming out, they're a lot more imaginative. The manufacturing has kind of allowed you to be able to create shapes in mass production that you wouldn't have been able to do before. And all of a sudden, this biomimicry is becoming more common in the design of pretty much all things that humans use and live in and move in.
Totally, man. Yeah. Do you think nature is the most like optimal way of collecting energy or distributing resources, or do you think humans can come up with ways that are more efficient?
It's a great question. I mean, when you think about it, nature, as it were, and if you're looking at it as just like a one single thing, it's had 4.6 billion years to get to where it is now. So it's got a little bit of a leg up on us. But at the same time, with the advent of the combination of quantum computing and AI, when you put those two things together, you can make an advance of 4.6 billion years in probably 4.6 seconds.
Exactly.
And so I don't know necessarily, like, evolution is a very long process, natural evolution. So this step that we're about to take here with quantum computing and AI together is the most consequential leap ever. And that, that's really, nobody really knows what's going to happen. In 1,000 years from now, a couple hundred years from now, the Earth is going to be a totally different place than it is right now. For better or for worse, we don't know, because there are different paths that can take, by the way. AI, it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. So it's kind of, we don't know there's a lot of uncertainty behind it. And whatever guardrails people think they can put into it, AI is out there now, and nobody wants to lose that race. So there's only so many guardrails that some people will put into it. At the end of the day, it's going to go where it wants to go. And where it wants to go is where human nature wants to go. And human nature is power. Human nature is wanting to have power. And so if you look at AI from that kind of like basic standpoint, somebody is going to win that race, and they're going to be the ones that are going to have the power. And whether they use that power for good or not, we just have to hope for the best.
What is your most like optimistic view on the future, considering all of the trends in AI and other technologies? How do you see
look, I think people are inherently good. The human race as a race is inherently good. And I mean, we're going to be able to do incredible things. I mean, people that are, dying from cancer right now in pretty, I think maybe decade or 2 decades are probably, going to be, a lot of those cases would probably be able to be cured, maybe even with just like a pill. It's kind of like a tough pill to swallow, as it were, no pun intended, right now, to know that somebody who's, has this problem in not too long of a period from now probably could be cured from it quite easily. And we'll look back at it as like we look at, back in the day, people could die of an infection from a small cut that they got until penicillin was invented. And so now you have this, but on such a bigger level that, the interesting thing is with, basically anti-aging and age reversal is kind of one of the elements that comes into play here too, because the average lifespan of a human is probably going to increase to a point until you get to this level where the cell regeneration needs to kind of start happening too. But AI kind of like enables this research into battling aging, and humans in the future will probably live maybe hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Maybe eternally if it's in a virtual setting. So, these kind of things are just really interesting to me. So I think that in the best case scenario to me is that this power that we have is used for the general good of humanity, while at the same time realizing that there's this inherent desire for power that humans have. And it's whether or not, it's not a question of whether or not somebody's going to use AI in the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's how are we going to prevent, I say the people that aren't the ones trying to do harm, how is that going to be prevented? How is it going to be mitigated? I mean, it's a tough thing to kind of think about, because even now where you see, these kind of like videos coming out that they're pretty close to the real thing of people saying things, whether it's actors, political figures, people that are known, or even people that aren't known, you and me. They could take a video of us and start creating. So, but to me, I think humans are inherently good and they want to do good. And I think the majority of humanity wants to do good. And as long as the people who want to do good have access to these tools of AI, then, we'll be all right. But that's still up for debate right now, who actually is going to have access to the very cutting edge of AI, and whoever has that wins.
Yeah. I see one potential solution that we could come up with is having a decentralized computing system cluster on which AI could be run, and it serves everyone. And so there's no one big owner of, let's say, ChatGPT AI system.
Yeah.
But this is like an open source where people are contributing and improving. But the incentive structure is set up in such a way where, in kind of like Bitcoin, it's incentivized to grow over time.
Right.
And that would compete with the proprietary models like now.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I think the way I see that is kind of, you really would have to have basically a contract or some kind of an agreement between the great superpowers of the world, the countries that come together and say, look, we realize what kind of danger this poses, and what kind of positive effects this could have. It needs to be something that is coordinated for all of humanity, not just a few people. Whether or not that can happen, it's tough, because I mean, you look at even the nuclear powers, they're not necessarily coordinating that ultimate power that they have right now. And so to think that we could get everybody together and do something like that and make it decentralized, I would love for that to be something that's possible. I just don't know that it is. I don't know that you're going to get enough countries to relinquish some level of control over AI and trust other countries to do it. So that's one of the kind of like the key aspects of decentralization in the blockchain is trust. So how are you establishing that trust? Of course, you have proof of work with Bitcoin, and you have proof of stake with the other, talking about currencies. But how do you create that trust between these nodes of supercomputers around the world? That to me would be something interesting to figure out how you do that.
Yeah. I mean, they already have blockchains for computation for like to do compute on a fully decentralized way.
Okay.
And you can even run websites and software algorithms basically on fully decentralized system. And they didn't have to ask any government to do, like, no one asked the government, can we start Bitcoin network? It just started on its own. And I think something like that could definitely potentially happen. In fact, there are already systems where they're experimenting. I forgot the name. I was reading about it, where they are running some versions of like this AI on the incentive structures are just not set up in the way for scale and for it to evolve and grow on its own. Now somebody has to put the intention, and if funding to
Right.
experiment with that.
Right.
But I think once they unlock the, let's say, incentives where I want to participate in that and I contribute my money, and that's I basically buy some kind of like ownership of this whole thing.
Right.
It serves everyone. The more it grows, the more it serves all of the participants. So you kind of need to figure out all of those dynamics.
Yeah.
And there's this question of now AI is completely escaping the control of humans, and what if it's this system that's just going to destroy us? I mean, that's up to a debate. I think if done right, we could send it into the right trajectory, and it does a lot more good than bad.
Yeah.
And by bad, I mean, let's say replacing a lot of jobs. That could be considered temporarily a bad outcome, like an externality.
Right.
But I think on the grand scheme of things, it's still moving us along the evolutionary path that is like a desirable outcome anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously I like to try and look at it from the positive perspective. It's interesting that you mentioned about the incentive. So the thing, like you look at Bitcoin, for it's a good example, because like the incentive for this trust mechanism is, the mining. And so the mining requires financial investment, but the financial benefit has to outpace that financial investment.
Yes.
And so now it's getting to the point where it's not just anybody that can mine it. I mean, you need to be able to buy hundreds of millions of dollars in graphics cards and set up these kind of farms. And so all of a sudden, it's not really decentralized. I mean, Bitcoin, yes, in theory, it's a decentralized currency, if you want to put it that way. But the mining and these kind of like trust mechanisms that are put in place aren't really decentralized. And so I think when the incentive for building this trust mechanism is financial, I don't think it can work. I think it needs to be another incentive. And I think there are, of course, other incentives besides financial that can drive, human desire. So whatever that incentive needs to be, I don't think financial is necessarily the one, because at some point, the financial inherently, it goes to the people who have the more financial resources to invest in getting back that financial incentive.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, humans would just have to figure something out like that. But this was just an example that is already out there that kind of works in some way. I agree with you that over time, maybe the consolidation of power and resources is a natural way of it like evolving. But there are different other ways of like proof of, actually I was part of this project where I was one of the validators of a network of, and it was based on proof of authority network. So you didn't have to necessarily put the compute. It's more about you putting your real name out there, and you say, I validate the transaction, and I'm a real node that it's attached to a real human. That was another like method of validating things.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just running like nodes that were just basically assigned to us.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that like a coin or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a PoE network. Like proof of POA, proof of authority.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard of that before. Okay.
Yeah, different things like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, could you share with me any like misconceptions or myths about solar that a lot of people get it wrong? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, and I think it's really unfortunate, a lot of times renewable energy has been politicized for, I think, no real reason other than just to create division. But at the end of the day, solar energy gives you the opportunity to be independent. It gives you, as a person, the opportunity to invest in something that's going to allow you to be at least partially independent from the utility, depending on where you are, and eventually fully independent. And so, and also independence comes from the fact that you become independent from having to spend, let's say $100 that would have been going to the utility is now going towards something that's providing you with equity in your home and also providing you with energy. There's not really anything else that exists that you can invest in right now that will both give you energy and pay for itself over time. There's really nothing else like that. And so, and look, there is, of course, a big issue with the manufacturing of solar panels, which is that, in Asia, some of these places where the solar materials and the ingots and the wafers are being produced, they're being done where people are not being treated in the right way that they should be in terms of working conditions and safety. And this is it's an open secret. Everybody knows this. Now, one of the amazing things that you see happening over the last couple of years, and by the way, the U.S. we didn't invent the solar panel. That was invented in France, but we basically invented the manufacturing process behind it, and we were at the forefront of manufacturing solar. At some point, the industry kind of took its eye off the ball of keeping manufacturing here, and they ended up sending everything overseas. And now repatriating this kind of manufacturing is quite difficult to do, and it's taken time. And there is, I believe, maybe 3 or 4 major companies that are trying to actually start doing the entire supply chain here. There's one big company, Q-Cells, which is based out of Korea, but they have a huge presence here in the U.S. And they're actually building a factory. It's either in Georgia, I believe it's in Georgia or South Carolina. I don't remember which state it's in. They're going to be able to actually create from the complete raw material of silicon, the ingots, the wafers, the cells, the entire supply chain here in the U.S. And this needs to happen. That is something that sometimes people will use. Oh, well, the dirty energy was used to make the solar panels. It's partially true. It's partially true because unfortunately, any solar panel that you buy right now in the US, the raw materials, most likely, unless it's from one company, cadmium telluride, it's a different technology that they use for utility scale up in, I believe they're in Ohio, First Solar. Otherwise, that's coming from a place where it's concerning what the working conditions are, number one, and the energy used to power that is also, in many cases, dirty energy. So it's a valid argument to make, but despite the energy part of it, the net benefit is still positive. Now, the working conditions part of it, there are a lot of mechanisms in place to prevent that material from coming here. And so there are other countries in Asia where that material can come from, and they don't have these kind of problems. But it's like a mechanism that's not perfect. So sometimes these things can kind of like creep their way into the supply chain. But where solar panels are right now are in a much better place than they were before in terms of this kind of like ethical sourcing of the supply chain. And from a cost perspective, they're as inexpensive as they've ever been. I mean, sometimes people ask me, well, maybe I'm going to wait. Like, what's the best time to go? The best time to go solar is literally right now, because you are going to be paying less towards the utility, and you're investing in something that's adding value to your home. And you can actually, by the way, lease systems here in Florida too. You don't have to buy it outright. And in other places, you can actually lease the system. They call basically you pay the person who owns the system, you're paying them for the electricity, not for the system themselves. That's not legal in Florida, but what is legal in Florida is that you can actually lease a system. So you don't even have to buy the system. Not the best financial investment, because if you're planning on staying somewhere for a while, it doesn't make sense to do that. But if you aren't and you're just renting, or you're going to be somewhere for a shorter period of time, you can do it. So there's a lot of options out there. So I think the biggest misconception is that like it's prohibitively expensive, and it's not. And there's tons of incentives right now for low income communities as well, to be able to get fully funded, granted systems on their homes as well.
Very cool.
So there's a lot of resources.
Amazing. Yeah. So maybe that's a great place for us to kind of wrap up. Maybe point people into some resources, directions, or share any other lost thoughts that you want people to know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information out there. One of the great resources is the Department of Energy. They've done endless amounts of studies on solar, the potential, where it's going, where the technology is going. There's the Solar Energy Technologies Office, CETO, has excellent information. A lot of it is just easy to kind of digest. And by the way, you can go onto ChatGPT and ask questions about this, and and just tell it to use sources like the DOE or CETO or even United Nations climate. I forget the name of the body, but they also have really good resources as well, so people can kind of just educate themselves and look at what options are out there and see if it makes sense for you to do it. But in almost all cases, it is something that will make sense for you, and you'll be happy. I mean, now that I have solar in my house, it's just, I'm like addicted to like my solar app. I open it up and I look at how much energy my panels are producing, and I'm like, the days where it's producing more than I use, it's like a win. It's like this great feeling that you get from just having panels on your roof. And I think I would love for, as many people as possible to have that feeling.
Very cool, man. Yeah. Thank you again. This was great. I hope everyone who is still around listening to our conversation, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the whole industry of solar panels and solar energy, renewable energy. And I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, how it goes.
Cool, man.